Hello fellow cultivators, welcome to the game Tale of Sword Immortal. And this is a sandbox roleplay cultivation game where you will play as Sword Cultivator and you progress from Chi Refining stage, goes to Foundation, Golden Core, North and Soul, Enlightenment, and finally to Transcendent. And during this journey, you will meet a lot of NPCs, finish a lot of side quests, learn a lot of sword skills, including Sword Heavenly skill from a certain Sword Immortal. And finally, with the help of another Sword Immortal, his name is Zhang-san, who is also the main developer, you will defeat the final boss in this game. So yeah, out of the 12 different martial arts spiritual rules, I have been saying that, well, fire is really powerful, fist is super good. However, it is without any doubt, sword is the most favorite element of the developers. It is just like an old Chinese saying, 天下武功,唯快不破. And that means out of all the martial arts in this world, the speed can defeat everything else. And yeah, sword is best because it has very fast speed, or we can just call it very short cooldown of all the skills. You can say this in two different aspects. One is, out of all the different routes, sword probably have the most shortest cooldown martial skill, and this makes it, especially Breath Sword, the best initial martial skill in the game and makes it extremely good at early game. But second point is actually way more important, and that is with the sword special skill, the combination of martial and special skill, and the sword mind skill including mastery, with double cooldown of motion skill as well as sword divine power, with a direct flat cooldown for the special skill, you can achieve nearly zero cooldown special skill and motion skill if you use them alternatively, and this gives rise to a series of great builds. You can use a wind motion skill and become invincible tornado all the time, just like I was shown in my video called The Easiest Build in Tale of Immortal, and indeed it is the easiest build because you are literally invincible the entire game, just like this. You can also use a water motion skill to create 10,000 different phantoms, which will do the martial skill attack for you and apply the debuff, and then you keep on using it and using your special skills, so that you put 10,000 sword on the screen and you do a lot of damage, and it cannot even be sealed by the King Luhua's skill if you have long distance enough. And just look at how many swords in here, and this is why it is one of the best build in this game, as I described in another of my videos called Another Best Build in the game of Tale of Immortal. And of course, you can use a fire motion skill combined with fire ultimate, or if you don't need it, so that you are creating fairy flames all the time because you have infinite short cooldown of your fire motion skill, and therefore you are boosting your damage soon to a crazy amount of value, and where you can do millions of damage at a very short amount of time, so-called fire sword. And this is what I mostly use in my Chaos playthrough series. We can start with two different effects. First, we're going to talk about the buff and debuff of sword martial skill and special skill. So I'm sure this is not first time you have heard this. If you have watched my other videos. In Tale of Immortal, every single art route can have one buff or a debuff if you use your martial or spiritual skill. For sword, the buff is called Sword Slash, and the debuff is called Bleed. And there are always 6 different special skills which works either with a buff or a debuff and generate some special effects. And for sword, this special effect is always reduce the cooldown of your motion skill. And this is the key of how does sword works. Any sword build, if you are not talking about reducing motion skill cooldown, then it's not a correct guide. 2 of them work with Sword Slash, so Gale Sword as well as Sunset Sword. If you look at the 11th, if you have at least 8 stacks of Sword Slash when casting this skill, the cooldown for motion skill minus 8 seconds. That's a flat 8 seconds cooldown reduction. And same thing goes for Gale Sword. It's the same at the same sub-skill. Well, sadly, Sky Shatter Sword do not have this sub-skill. On the other hand, if you're using a bleed build, if you look at the 9th sub-skill, for every stack of bleed denotated, the cooldown of motion skills minus 0.7 seconds. So not flat 8 seconds, but every stack of bleed. In late game, you can easily have 13 to 16 stacks of bleed to apply it on the enemy in a very short amount of time, and this is again almost like 8 seconds, right? Or more than 8 seconds flat cooldown reduction. And it's the same thing for Broken Star Sword, again in the 9th sub-skill, as well as Sky Cleaver Sword in the 9th sub-skill. So these three works if you're using Shadowless, Broken Star, or Sky Cleaver Sword. Make sure you are using a martial skill that applies bleed. On the other hand, if you use Gale Sword and Sunset Sword, make sure you're going to use a martial skill that applies Sword Slash. And the combination of martial skill and special skill will grant you flat cut 8 to 10 seconds cooldown of the motion skill. Now let's look at motion skill. In general, every single motion skill itself will have a sub-skill. For example, look at the 4th one. The motion skill's cooldown minus 3 seconds. This sub-skill can appear in every single motion skill, and you should have it and comprehend it to maximum. This will bring down 30.3 to 10 seconds. You would need something in your mastery. So every single different type of masteries in this game, they will have 4 different type of cooldowns. Basically, if a legendary, mythical, either martial spiritual skill or special skill or ultimate or motion skill is equipped, the cooldown minus 25%. And to be honest, if you have looked at my Chaos playthrough, since I am a sect leader, I can put my entire sect pavilion full of the same martial art. For example, here I'm using a 5th one, and getting here, I have a lot of choices, and every half year it will refresh, and you will eventually find at least some skill with, I don't know, maybe not every single cooldown, right? I mean, you might think, okay, all 5, 25% cooldown is too much, but at least you will find one mastery with a cooldown of special skill as well as motion skill. Alright, that's just 2. It's quite common. It's more common than you think. Now, out of all of this, only the Sword Mastery will have the additional cooldown of the motion skill. Look at the last sub-skill here. Cooldown motion skill minus 50%. And this is crazy. So with the minus 25%, you already bring the 10-second cooldown motion skill. Remember, from 13.3 minus 3, so 10.3 seconds. You already bring it down to, let's say, about 7.5 seconds. And to be honest, that is already enough if you're using a Sword Slash special skill. So that is already quite enough. I mean, especially if you have Sword Slash or that minus 8 seconds cooldown. And now with the Sword Mastery, you additionally brings down this 8 seconds to 4 seconds. And that is much more easier for you to reach actually, zero cooldown of your motion skill. And that is the key point of how to reach zero cooldown motion skill. And to be honest, you can reach this stage maybe around Narth and so. You don't really need to actually progress to much later game. So in sort of middle game, you can already have pretty good, nearly zero cooldown motion skill if you are sect leader and you have built your character correctly. Now you might be thinking, this is just one step to reach zero cooldown motion skill. The next step is, how do you reach zero cooldown of special skill? And this brings into Sword Divine Power. And look at the last sub-skill. This is again only available in the Sword Divine Power, not in every other element. Every time you cast motion skill, the cooldown of special skills is minus 6 seconds. And this is actually quite important to have, because if you think back a little bit, the first time you use your special skill to reduce your cooldown of emotion skill to 0, then you use your emotion skill. However, your special skill is still in cooldown, so you cannot use it again to bring your emotion skill cooldown to 0 again in the next round. But with the Sword Divine Power, every time you use emotion skill, you flat cut 6 seconds cooldown from your special skills. And that, if you have built your mind skill correctly, again, minus 25% of your special skill, important. And normally, your special skill, in general, your cooldown is base 10.2 seconds. And there's, for Shadowless, there's minus 2 seconds in their sub-skill. And if you're using, for example, Gale Sword, again, minus 2 seconds. And if you're using, for example, Sunset Sword or Broken Star Sword, it's even less, it's minus 3 seconds cooldown. But of course, there's original cooldown is 11.2 seconds. So basically, both the case, it will bring the base cooldown of special skill to 8.2 seconds. Now, 8.2 seconds, just using a simple mastery, not even need to be sword mastery, with 25%, will bring 8.2 seconds to 6 point something, 04 seconds, and flat cut of 6 seconds cooldown will bring the special skill cooldown back to 0. Therefore, after you use your motion skill, you can immediately use your special skill again. And once you use this special skill to denotate bleed or simply trigger sword slash, you again cut your motion skill cooldown to 0. And that's how you, in general, reach 0 cooldown for both special and motion skill. So after talking about how sword build works, let's actually now dive into what are special martial skills, special skills, motion skills, and ultimate. So there are 3 martial skills, and the best one in middle to late game is Moonshadow Sword. It does have the highest cooldown, 0.6 seconds, because the other 2, one have 0.2 and one have 0.3 seconds. However, you release a multiple sword, and any type of martial skill with multiple projectiles allows you to apply the buff of debuff much faster. That's just how it is, so it is best. And not only that, in general, Moonshadow Sword has probably the best projectile in the entire game. One of the best, let's call it that way. It's because, unlike many other martial skills with multiple projectiles, which is always coming from yourself and spread out, Moonshadow Sword is going towards where you're pointing. So it's crazily good that you can always have all of those projectiles attacking the same enemy. Breeze Sword, on the other hand, is the best early game martial skill. Not only it has very short cooldown, 0.3 seconds, and that means that if you have the minus 0.11 seconds cooldown reduction from this skill, you basically are like this. Of course, here I have Reborn Burst, which means I have 2 projectiles, and I'm using Bluebird, which already grants me minus 20% of martial skill cooldown. So it might be faster than your case in the early game, but still, with a Breeze Sword, it's just very good. And another important thing about Breeze Sword is you need to have this one sub-skill, that is Breeze Sword pierce through some enemies. And this really helps you against any mobs. And to be honest, if you are finding one drawback of sword martial skills, that most of them do not have this pierce through thing. So if you hit an enemy, it will not go through it, unlike many other martial spiritual arts in the game. Or it can, when you hit something like a rock in the thing, it cannot pierce through. But Breeze Sword does have this thing, it can pierce through more enemies. And that does really helps a lot. And the next one is Lone Star Sword, which is a bit silly one. So it has the shortest cooldown in the entire game, 0.2 seconds. And obviously it deals less damage compared to Breeze Sword. But you might be thinking, what is super fast? It's great, right? But it has this very silly feature. If you are continuously using the Lone Star Swords, the accuracy will decrease. So, for example, we notice that there are some of the sword just goes sideways instead of hitting the enemy. So I do not know why they put this thing in this martial art, and which basically makes it unusable. And the fun fact is, I think the developer team tried to fix their mistake by the first time introduced the tradition effect, set effects, which actually makes Lone Star Sword better. But the player base thinks that we are not using Lone Star Sword anyway. What's the point of making this better? We want Sword to have some other better tradition set effects, as if Sword is not already the best element in the game. But anyways, developer teams thought about it and then they cut through that idea. So that's how it is. Now we are going to talk about special skill. Let's start with Shadowless Sword. And this is probably the best special skill in the entire game again. It's super high damage because it's releasing a lot of swords, and each of them deals quite high damage, and all those swords will track down the enemy within a certain range, of course, but it's tracking and it's automatic, very high damage. And the sub skills including plus even more Shadowless Sword, plus 4 directly, and also if the enemy have 8 stacks of bleed, another plus 4, and then their sub skills increase how much denotation bleed damage as well. It's just incredibly good. In fact, if you are early in the game and you face an NPC with sword, Shadowless Sword, and you see that they are using this skill, immediately use your motion skill to dodge it. Because using motion skill most of the time will make the sword lose track on yourself, because otherwise you will be one-shotted. And same applies to you. If you are using a Shadowless Sword against NPC in the same realm, you one-shot them. And how does it look? Yeah, that's how it looks. Basically, you release a lot of stacks of sword, but if you are too far away, yeah. So here it does not really hit the enemy, it just disappears if you are out of the range. If that's more important if you are early in the game when the range is not that big, just keep that in mind. So here we add this Empyrean Edge starting Destiny, which the translation is not complete. Not only your Broken Star Sword will be replaced, but your Shadowless Sword will also be replaced. And in this case, this is how it looks, Empyrean Edge Shadowless. And basically, you see that instead of 14, now it becomes 18. So it's even better. And another thing is, it makes your Shadowless Sword becomes golden. Fancy. So instead of talking about Gale Sword, we are first going to introduce the 3 special skills which works with bleed. So next one is Broken Star Sword. It is almost as good as Shadowless Sword. In a way it's even better, but in practice I still prefer Shadowless Sword more. So it also works with bleed, so basically drops a Great Sword from at the target location, deals a ton of damage. You can already see that damage is not as good as Shadowless Sword, which is 14 or 18 multiplied by 6000. Here you have only 1, which is 9000. Damage is much less, but it is actually an area effect. So it can deal damage multiple times if you hit the enemy first and then come out. So that is there, okay? And yeah, just like Shadowless Sword, it can denotate bleed and deal more damage. There are sub-skills which increase its range, more damage, reduce cooldown, etc. And also, it has a thing that for every enemy kills, the cooldown minus 1.2 seconds. That's good. But one very important last sub-skill. If this skill is cast when there's only one enemy, another flat 4 second cooldown. And this means this is one of the few special skills that can reach 0 cooldown by itself. You don't need to go through, refreshing special skill and motion skills, the usual thing with the sword build. Just if you have blood energy 3, you have a down mine minus 10%, you have wandering cloud stat effect another minus 10%, you reach 0 cooldown. And just look at my video talking about how to reach them. And that is something called the strongest skills in this game, I guess. And you just need to press down your right mouse button. You have 0 cooldown. Special skills. Broken Star Sword. And it is quite powerful. And just like Shadowless Sword, this one also have an upgraded version if you have finished game once. As you can see, the icon again changed, and it is now called Imperium Edge. So what does it do? First, you will have 7,000 sword damage per second. It becomes time thing, within a range, and then drop a great sword, deals another 14,000 damage. So adding together 29,000 damage compared to 9,000, it's much better. It's almost like 3 times better. So yeah. And again, you have a standard bleed effect, alright? And everything else is the same, so you can still reach 0 cooldown of this, which by the way I do not recommend you use because it's... Let's first use it once. A lot of sword coming up, and then giant sword coming down. Shoot! Giant sword coming down. And if you are using the 0 cooldown build on this one, the game will become very slow. Just like this. I'm not pressing down my right mouse button for quite a few seconds. It's just my computer become very slow. The next one which works with bleed is Sky Cleaver Sword. So it's not as fancy as the other two. So it drops 6 Sky Cleaver Swords, but each of them deals a lot of damage, 19,000, and this is actually without, the upgraded version. I know the upgraded version Broken Star, the Imperial Edge is 29, that's a lot. I mean, Shadowless Sword is still 6 multiplied by 14, that's also a lot. But this one is just by itself, it's quite a big damage, okay? And it's not like 6 cannot hit the same enemy, you can still. At least 2 of them can hit the same enemy, or 3 of them, so it is still quite good, okay? And again, when you denotate the bleed, it does 10% more damage. But there's also one thing about this special skill, is the sub skill can have this thing which is the last one. Not only, first you have, again, if you kill the enemy, reduce cooldown, so it's always great. But also, if this skill hits only enemy in the battlefield for the next 6 seconds, the enemy will receive 30% more damage. This is 30% more damage for every single damage you deal to them. So it basically applies a debuff to the enemy, which makes them receive 30% more damage. It's not showing there, but it does work. So basically, you can consider this as a 30% damage buff to yourself, and to all your summons. So it is not too bad. And now we shift to Sword Slash related to special skills. The first one is the Gale Sword. And just by initial look, it feels like this is not good at all. You release 4 swords, chasing down within a certain range, deals 1000 damage. And if you directly compare this one to Shadowless Sword, which is 14 sword, deals 6000 damage, you want to be thinking, what? This is way worse than Shadowless Sword, which by the way, it is still the truth, it is worse than Shadowless Sword, but it's not that bad as you might think when you first look at it. And the main reason is, if you have Sword Slash, the buff to yourself, you will consume all the stacks, and each stack will release another round of swords. So if I now notice that I already have 14 stacks of Sword Slash, I press down this. Instead of 1 round of 4, I'm going through 14 rounds of 4 swords. So that is 56 rounds of Gale Sword. And this is how it works. So you really need to use your martial skills, deal damage to the enemy, and apply 16 stacks. Look at on my top. Even though I am continuously using this, and just notice that this is more than 16 rounds. This is because I have been continuously doing damage and applying the buff to myself. So while I'm using the Gale Sword, it just continuously shoots out more sword to the enemy, and almost for like at least 3 seconds through, because now I only have 1 second cooldown until I can use it another round. But of course, in order to reach this state, you need to have very good attack speed from your martial skill. And there are other sub skills which, for example, have 70% chance to inflict bleed, which is not really that useful because you are not going to use this with. I mean, you are already using Gale's for special skill, so you are not going to have any other special skill which denotes bleed. But anyway, but there's one thing. Notice that there's one sub skill. I put it to gray here. For every stack of sword slash consumed, agility will increase 0.11 seconds. It is gray because I want it to be, and I will show you if I do not make this thing gray. And now we have this thing to red, so it's every single stack, my agility, aka my speed, will increase 12%. And let's apply 16 stacks of sword slash, use this thing, and just look at how fast I am going. You become so too fast that you can't control yourself, and which can be very bad. So try not have this sub skill, or if you have this sub skill, try to make it low. The next one is Sunset Sword, and looks quite the icon looks quite like the Imperial Edge, but the other way around, blue and going downwards. So it basically summons a rain of sword, and it's literally a rain of sword, and it deals 4,000 per second sword damage within a certain range for 4.8 seconds. And if you have sword slash, you consume all of sword slash and making this thing extend 1 second. So if you have 16 stacks of sword slash, that's basically this thing will last more than 20 seconds. Not only that, because sub skills can again increase duration, right? And also it reduces agility within this area. I mean, many other special skills also have this thing, but this is good because they cannot run out of this region, right? And also, if you cast this skill when there's only one enemy, you again increase the duration by another 4.8 seconds, so 25 seconds of special skill, and which means your special skill cooldown will be long time gone. You can fire another round and another round and another round. In general, this is how it looks. It looks quite, doesn't look that very good, right? It's just a little bit sword rain, but so here we are changed to Moon Shadow Sword, which is better at applying a buff. We're also using a finger motion skill, which is super fast, so that I can refresh these two. And let's do it. Sometimes it doesn't work that well because but you can see how crazy this can become. This is how it finally looks. So yeah, even a not very much used special skill Sunset Sword can still be very powerful if you are using them correctly. And finally, the last special skill, Sky Shatter Sword. This is probably the most unfavorite child of the entire sword family. And that is, first of all, it does not have any sub-skill which allows you to reduce the cooldown motion skill, which means if you are using this thing, you cannot, make this motion skill and sword special skill refreshing cooldown thing. But also, even though the developer gives them this sub-skill that if there is only one enemy, it costs the cooldown minus 4 seconds. So almost every single special skill with this sub-skill can reach 0 cooldown special skills. Okay, this is because their natural cooldown is 11.4 seconds or 11.3 seconds, something like that. However, the natural cooldown of this one is 12 seconds, which means even if you have the best setup, Blood Energy 3, minus 25% from your Mastery, Wandering Cloud and Daoma, you can still not reach 0 cooldown of special skills. So you see that the cooldown is about 0.1 seconds. It's almost 0 cooldown, but not exactly. So I think the developer team really did it deliberately. Maybe if there are whatever beta version, alpha version of this game, this skill is super powerful, so they think they need to nerf it. But at this point, it's really the worst, probably one of the worst out of the entire sword family. Even though it's still quite good. I mean, we're talking as if 0.1 second cooldown of special skill is not good, but that is not true. It is really great compared to many other skills in this game. but still out of all the sword family. Yeah. And another thing about this skill is it's actually dealing a lot of damage to enemies within this range, but it's a total of those. So if there's only one enemy in that range, that's a 13k to all of them. And of course you consume sword slash and make them damage higher. So even though 13k doesn't look that much, but you know, you have 16 stacks of sword slash, so it's a lot. And you have very short cooldown. If you compare it to Broken Star, it's better than the original Broken Star. Now let's talk about the motion skill. The sword motion skill, even though not the greatest motion skill to work with sword build, is still not a bad one. So it can increase agility, and not only from sub-skills, but in general your agility will be increased, and increase the critical resistance. So basically it does the basic thing of motion skill, that is speed and critical rest very nicely. It lasts for 4 seconds, cooldown 13 seconds. There are sub-skills to increase the duration and minus the cooldown, okay? But also you have additional agility boost when you're flying on your sword, so you're very fast. And also it will increase your damage, reduce your martial skill cooldown, and increase the damage, reduce your damage taken. So in general, these 3 sub-skills, so from 9s to 11s, basically make you stronger. But also, every time when you martial arts kiss enemy, you can reduce the enemy's speed as well. But all of this makes it still very mediocre motion skill. It's almost exactly the same thing as a palm motion skill, which is already one of the worst one, except that palms can generate palm wind when you get hit, which is not that great. But sword one have this one special thing, which is you are flying. You are literally flying, and you can bypass many limits on the ground. And I think you have seen this in my spear video, but I will just show it again in case anyone haven't seen this. So you know that there are some enemies in some parts. For example, this guy, Choming Bird. This guy is here, and you are limited on the lower part. But if you are not using here, you cannot go up, right? But if you are using this, you are flying up. You can do damage from behind. That's what flying up means. And in this case, for sword build it's not that important, but it's much better for some other builds. For example, if you're using a heel breaker fist, you need to get close to the enemy in order to hit it. And sometimes a sword motion skill can make some impossible things possible. And nominate the final battle, not really the final battle, one of the most difficult battles against the final boss in the game, Hengdian on top of Tianyuan Mountain. If you're using a heel breaker fist, initially you can't hit it because it's out of your range. But you can use the sword motion skill, come to the back of Hengdian using heel breaker if you have Warlord's Phantom, and build up a little bit of Fairy Flame, where your Phoenix, because you cannot use fire motion anymore since you have to use sword motion. In that way, you one-shot Hengdian. So, it can be used in some special cases to make some very special things. And as I showed in my spear video, if you are using a spear mode build, you probably want to sit on a sword flying up and then xing the Choming Bird or the Jiaolong. And then we are going to talk about is the ultimate. So the first one is Skyfall Sword, which is a great ultimate. So for the duration of emotion skill, a stack of Sword Shadow is triggered every 5 seconds. You can cast ultimate when there are 5 stacks, so either 25 seconds of duration, or you just simply use your motion skill 5 times. It's like that. And then it will trigger activate all the Sword Shadows to drop great swords, and each of them deals some damage, okay? And for every stack of Sword Shadow activated, you will drop 20 more great sword. So basically you want to use this thing when you already have a lot of sword shadows on the ground, and which means you want to use your motion skill a lot of times, and that is why you want to use it with, for example, a water sword build. And another thing about this great thing is look at the sub-skills. Now look at the final sub-skill, every time the stack of Sword Shadow is triggered, you receive invincible last 1.2 seconds. So if you have 60 Sword Shadows on the ground, you are invincible for 1 minute, which is exactly cooldown of the ultimate. And in reality, since you have minus 12 seconds, become 48, you have Mastery to receive another minus 25 if you have it. 48 becomes 36. 36 seconds cooldown if you have 30-ish? Yeah, 30 shadows on the ground. Basically, you just need to use your motion skill 30 times. You use your ult, you're invincible for 30 seconds. And 36 seconds later, you can again use your ultimate. It's kinda crazy. And I think I've showed this in my Water Sword video, but just to show it again, how does it look? Oh, I'm not using the best Water Sword build because I'm using Gale Sword. Gale Sword sometimes have this problem, and I am too fast. Because I'm too fast, so I can't really apply the buff to myself that consistently. However, now we have all of the shadow thing and Sword Shadow, and we activate them. See myself, I am invincible, there's the wrong thing around me. And it deals a lot of damage, and now I am not invincible anymore, because I do not have that much of Sword Shadow on the ground. But, yeah. And, forgot to mention in the previously, but this one, Sky's one, another great thing is you don't need to use combat expertise weapon, because the precondition is extremely easy to trigger. You just need 5 times the motion skill, which is nothing. You can do it probably in 1 or 2 seconds if you're using a proper sword build. So yeah, that's great. Well, the other ultimate is that Divinity Sword. So basically you need to use the sword skill with bleed first of all. And you can see that basically you need, actually every time an enemy with bleed dies, you receive a sword soul. And you can only cast this skill if you have 10 stacks of it, which means you need to kill 10 enemies with bleed. And then consume all the sword souls to summon the Sword Master Phantom, which deals some damage. The damage itself is not that useful. Look at sub-skills. What does it do? Increase more sword? Okay. For every duration, every time you cast a motion skill, damage taken minus 50%. That is a good thing. Basically, you already have damage taken minus 80%. I forgot to mention this, but very importantly, in the Sword Divine Power, every time you cast a motion skill for the next 2 seconds, you damage taken minus 80%. That's what makes you super tanky as well. Extremely useful, and I forgot to mention. So, anyway, now with this out, you have another minus 50%, and if you have the Destiny Dipper Tail Footwork, another 50%. It's crazy how tanky you can become. And also, the final sub-skill here. For duration of this out, the cooldown of martial skill minus 50%. That is literally the best, cooldown reduction for the martial skill. It's because this can last quite long. This can be quite useful if you want really fast attack from your martial skill, which is sometimes quite useful. For example, if you have like a finger build where you need to apply debuff very fast, or something like a palm or fist, where basically all of things that you need martial skills specification, and if you do not have it, and somehow you got combat expertise weapon, which by the way, you should have that to use this ultimate, because who will wait you to kill 10 enemies? You won't use this thing at the beginning. Then, even without martial skill specification, you can achieve a very fast attack, and at least temporarily for you to make your build work. And how does this guy look? So in order to show the cooldown reduction, let's first see. This is in general how I attack. It is already quite fast, I know. But now we use this. You can sort of see it from your eyes, it is even faster. And just look at how this sword going the other way around. It's not tracking, that's why the damage doesn't matter. It's mainly for the speed increase of your martial skills. Okay, back to the minor skills. We have been said just now when I was talking about ultimate that there is a thing that in Divine Power, every time you cast a motion skill, for the next 2 seconds your damage taken minus 80%, which is again another great sub-skill. Better than both of sub-skills in all the Divine Powers, I would say. But also, it can have the thing that, if Divine Power also have this one thing which I grayed out, that is for sword stat reaches some value, and if you are lower realm, this value will be lower. If you are transcendent, 950. The duration of motion skill will be extended by some seconds. This actually is quite good if you are at early or middle game and using a wind sword, because at early or middle game, your Shadowless Sword, or your, for example, if you're using Gale Sword, you cannot have 8 stacks of Sword Slash, or at least enough stacks of Bleed for you to reduce the motion skill cooldown to 0. And in that case, you might want to have this sub-skill a bit longer so that your tornado will take longer. Basically, you are in average, the time you are in the cooldown motion skill will be less because you have a longer time in where you are in the invincible mode. But if you already build up your character, you don't need to use this. And in fact, if you're using a sword build like a generally sword motion skill, you probably won't reduce the fact that you have some time, duration time, because you want to have your motion skill and special skill all the time, you want to use it instead of letting it durate. That's why this one I go to do less. But it can be very useful for you if you are using Wind Sword early game. And now let's go to Master. We already talked about everything. Secret menu. So you have the standard stuff, increase the duration and maximum stacks of the buff and debuff, and also automatically applies buff and debuff to yourself and to the enemy. And then have the standard thing, which is to transform buff and debuff. You denotate the bleed, receive sword slash. You denotate sword slash, you receive applies bleed. Standard stuff. But then there are also things like if you have 5 stacks of sword slash, you increase the crit. For every stack of bleed on battleground, your damage increases a little bit more. And actually, the one important sub-skill in the sword secret menu is every time you cast a motion skill, you instantly receive 6 stacks of sword slash. This is how you can actually use a Gale Sword with a sword slash. And this is because, Gale Sword, or even, for example, your Sunset Sword, every time you use it, you consume all stacks of sword slash. And usually you cannot deal damage that fast to apply 8 stacks of sword slash where you're using your special skill the second time, because your cooldown is very short, right? Your motion skill and special skill are just refreshing the cooldown. With this, you can directly receive 6 stacks of sword slash every time you use a motion skill. You only need to apply 2 stacks of sword slash again in order to reach 8 stacks of sword slash, therefore to cut down the cooldown again. So if you are using Gale Sword or Sunset Sword, make sure you are having this 6 stacks of sword slash. That's the reason why if I'm using Water Sword, which I usually do not with a Gale Sword, I will use a sword secret menu. But otherwise, I could simply use a Fist secret menu to apply the stun, or Palm secret menu to apply the true damage, if you are not using sword slash. So that's another reason why technically bleed with Shadowless Sword is still better than sword slash with Gale Sword. And next thing is the transition effect, where you can get at the transcendent. I mean, it is a thing if you want to min-max, but in real gameplay it is not that important. So sword have 2. One is Flourish Snowflakes. The 2-set effect, if you're equipped with AoE special skill, you will cast automatically every 5 seconds for duration of sword motion skill. You need to use sword motion skill, that is not good. But the 4-set effect basically increase the area of those AoE 50%, and also when you're casting AoE special skill, it will cast another time. So it is actually quite not too bad. And then they have the Clinking Jade. Where is it? Yeah. This is actually one of the best 2-set effects. Basically, whenever time you use martial skill, you have 50% chance to release a Dragon Slayer Sword aura, attacking again, so extra damage. And also the 4 set effects, when you those extra sword use 15 times damage, you again increase the amount of Shadowless Sword 6 times, as if Shadowless Sword is not good enough. I have no words for how much they love Shadowless Sword. So to start, you can see this cyan looking, flying around tracking sword. That is the Dragon Slayer sword from the Clinking Jade effect. And you can also see that the area of the Sunset Sword is much bigger. Now about Rare Destinies. Even though you should have different Rare Destinies, you are using different builds. Like if you're using Water Sword, if you have the correct sub-skills, your mana should not be a problem. But if you're using Fire Sword and do not have Goshen, so your mana can be a big problem. And that is time when you probably want to use Blood Energy 3. And in general, Blood Energy is a quite good destiny because the minus 20% cooldown, your special skill will be much less cooldown, and it is quite great. But of course, if you're using Blood Energy 3, use Blood Power as well, because you need to get your HP back. So that is the case. And if you're using Water Sword, you do not feel like using Blood Energy because that requires you to keep your MP at 0. And if you have the sub skill to regain MP when you're losing Phantoms, then by all means you're choosing something else, like Cloud Piercing Lightning plus No Trace in Snow, or Always Someone Better, or you can just simply use Martial Skill Specification 1, 2, 3, because those are good in early game. In late game become less important, but there's no point of reducing them as well, and that is what I did in my Chaos playthrough. And apart from this, then there are also general great ones like Concealed Nirvana, best defense 1, Murderous Rise, best offense 1, so very general. And Combat Expertise, if you're using for weapon, this is when you are, for example, using, I don't even know, some modes where you're using Divinity Sword, and yeah, this is when you need to use it, because if I am going to, you don't need, as I mentioned before, you don't need this to cast the other out, because they only need to use motion skills. That's very easy. And if you're using, for example, Wind Sword, you might using Combat Expertise Bare Hand so that it can use Feast out. And if you're using Fire Sword, of course, using Combat Expertise Fire, so you can summon the Phoenix. So this really depends. And then Supernova Sword is mostly because it's fancy, and you are already having 10,000 swords on the screen, why not have more sword on the screen? But also it's in general not too bad destiny as well. And you can, if you don't like this thing, replace it with something different. And finally, Tiger Spirit Dragon Soul is actually quite great for sword build if you're using Shadowless or something like a Gale Sword, because the 2 seconds cooldown is not for damage within one single cast. And for example, you have 14 different Shadowless Sword or 56 different Gale Sword. Each of them can trigger Tiger Spirit Dragon Soul independently without 2 second cooldown. And even though, as I mentioned in my Destiny guide video, there is a bug currently that is not really actually doing the damage with total martial skill or total special skill. It's only one of them, so it's 1/6 of the damage it's supposed to be. It is still quite good. So, and especially good in early to middle or late game. It's only becoming a little bit a problem to slow your computer down in end the game. So in general, I still recommend you to take it. And yeah, it's the same thing when choosing Divine Souls. Like you probably can always choose. Let's click on this. You can always choose a Jiaolong Soul because it have good damage. And if you're using Water Sword, you can actually choose a Lu Wu Soul because you are using your motion skills a lot. And otherwise, Goshen Soul if you're using Fire Sword to get more, and you are not using Blood Energy, of course, to regain a lot of MP. And otherwise, Xuangui Soul is in general a great one to help you survive. Same thing goes for Ru Field, 3 Fist, 3 Sword, that's only it. Reborn Birds, I would say before I was still thinking you can use things like Candlelight or Firefly, something like that. Candlelight looks good with Fire Sword to increase your damage of your skills, or Candlelight, Firefly to reduce your motion skill cooldown a bit more. That is there, but if you are lazy to think about those things or refresh for the correct sub-skill, just use a blue sword. It's good. And finally, even though it's not really part of the build, you should always use the sword heavenly art. It's great. It's one of the best heavenly art. And you're using a sword, so why not adding more swords? And I hope that covers everything about sword build. And I know I haven't done this kind of complete build guide for quite a long time, because these videos are extremely long, which means they are naturally not welcomed by YouTube and or in general by the audience, because now nobody likes very long videos. Even myself don't like to watch very long videos. I have to admit, I have never really finished any of my super long videos by myself at all. But I still, in order to introduce everything in one whole, I need to put them into one video, and that naturally makes it very long, because this game, it does have a little bit of depth about how things work. It takes time to explain how does things work. So sadly, I have to put everything into one single video, which makes this video extremely long and boring. But I hope this introduces everything and explains all the problems or your questions, how to make a sword build work. And probably from this video, you understand why you need to use certain skills and why this skill works with that skill, and why certain destinies, even though it looks good and was recommended in some guides, for example Spirit Fusion, does not mean too much or not really the best choice for a sword build, because you are really using those special skills in the first time to reduce the cooldown. And what's the point to spend more energy, MP, to cast it the second time with less damage when you can already cast it the second time by yourself, just refreshing motion and special skill cooldowns? And yeah, so I hope this video does answer those questions, and if you find this video helpful to you in this game, please consider leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and as usual, I will see you next time.